He only took the job to feed his son. A job no one else wanted. A job that meant waking up before dawn, wearing a suit he couldn't afford, and driving a man the world feared. But what started as a ride to survive became a journey that would test his soul, heal old wounds, and change everything he believed about himself, family, and second chances. It was 4:48 a.m. when Elijah Hayes stood in the hallway of his crumbling apartment, tightening a borrowed tie with shaking fingers. The tie was too stiff, the shirt too white, and his shoes still had tiny scuff marks from the second-hand store. But it didn't matter. Not today. In the next room, his 10-year-old son, Max, lay curled under a faded Spider-Man blanket, his mouth slightly open in deep sleep. On the chipped kitchen counter, a sticky note read, "Good luck, Dad. I love you. Be brave." Elijah ran his fingers over those words like a prayer. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in this suit, not on this path. 3 years ago, he was a construction foreman with a good team, solid pay, and a plan. But then came the accident. A fall from a scaffolding that left his back wrecked, bills piling up, and his marriage in ruins. Since then, he'd scraped by. Day jobs, night shifts, DoorDash, anything to keep Max's world turning. But this was different. The job came through a friend of a friend. A wealthy executive needed a private driver. No one else lasted. Too quiet, too demanding, too cold, they said. But Elijah didn't care. He didn't need warm smiles. He needed a paycheck. By 5:25 a.m. he was outside the estate. It looked like a dream wrapped in stone and steel. A modern castle perched on a private hilltop overlooking the city skyline, its gate glowing under soft amber lights. He parked the black SUV, one of 3 luxury vehicles, and stared at the mirrored windows of the house. His fingers gripped the wheel. For a moment, doubt slipped in like fog. What if I mess up? What if they see through me? Then he glanced at the note again. Be brave. The door of the mansion opened. Out walked Damien Roysteck, mogul, venture capitalist, and the kind of man whose face appeared on Forbes covers, usually in the same sentence as brilliant, ruthless, and impossible. Damien was dressed like he belonged to another universe. Navy trenchcoat, black gloves, and a smartwatch that probably cost more than Elijah's car. He didn't acknowledge Elijah, didn't smile, just opened the back door and slid into the SUV with a quiet drive. Elijah didn't speak. He merged onto the main road like a man walking a tightrope, steady, focused, invisible. The silence in the car was so thick it could be folded. They drove for 26 minutes. Damien didn't look up once from his phone. Then, suddenly, his voice cut through. Name Elijah Hayes, military. No sir. HM, a single syllable. Not approval, not judgment, just inventory. Elijah's grip on the wheel tightened. You have a child? Damien asked, eyes still on his phone. Yes, a son. How old? 10. Damien nodded. Still typing. Elijah wanted to ask why that mattered, but he kept his mouth shut. Every instinct in him said, don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ask questions. Don't assume this man cares. Over the next 2 weeks, Elijah picked him up every morning at precisely 5:45 a.m. They didn't talk much. Damien gave directions like commands. Office, airport, private meetings, always tight-lipped, always alone. And Elijah, he watched, quietly, observing the man behind the tinted glass. He noticed the small things. The way Damien stared at family photos in his office but never smiled. The rare moments he rubbed his temple, looking more exhausted than powerful. The untouched breakfasts his assistants packed in the leather lunchbox. One rainy Thursday, Elijah saw him pause near a piano in the corner of his penthouse, fingers brushing the keys but never playing. Damien Royce was wealthy beyond belief, but something about him felt broken. Elijah started to wonder why such a powerful man would live like this, alone, guarded, cold, but he kept driving, always driving. Each night he came home to Max and told made-up stories about boring meetings with guys who don't laugh. They'd eat peanut butter sandwiches and fall asleep watching old cartoons. Until one night, Max asked, Dad, why do rich people look so sad? Elijah paused. Maybe because they forget what matters. Max nodded like he understood something. Elijah still DIDN, single quotes T. 3 weeks in. It happened. They were on the way to a charity gala when Damien barked, turn right, take the bridge Quincy Avenue. But Elijah hesitated. There was an accident on Quincy. He heard it on the radio. Without thinking, he took the express lane instead. I said Quincy Avenue. Damien snapped. Sir, there's a 3-car pileup. I thought. You thought. I didn't hire you to think. I hired you to follow directions. The SUV fell into a sharp silence. Elijah swallowed hard, his jaw clenched. But then, minutes later, Damien spoke again, softer this time. You were right. Just that. No apology, no eye contact. But something shifted. For the first time, Elijah saw something behind the part. Flicker of respect. From that day, the rides changed. Damien began asking questions. Not small talk, but real questions. How did your wife leave? What was your favorite job before this? Why didn't you stay down after the accident? Elijah answered carefully, truthfully, and sometimes. Damien listened. One morning, Damien asked, if you had everything, money, power, what would you do? Elijah smiled softly. I'd build a home where kids like mine didn't have to watch their parents break just to survive. Damien didn't respond, but he didn't scoff either. On the 6th week, Damien asked Elijah to drive him somewhere different. No security, no assistance, just us. They drove for 2 hours, deep into rural hills, past country roads and forgotten barns. Finally, they reached a small cemetery. Damien stepped out without a word. He knelt before a grave marked Sophia Roy's daughter, Dreamer. Elijah watched from the driver's seat, frozen. For the first time, Damien's shoulders slumped. His hand trembled, and Elijah knew this wasn't just a job anymore. It was something else, a road neither of them expected. It started with a silence that didn't feel empty. When Damien Royce returned to the car, his face was unreadable. He didn't speak. Elijah didn't ask. The 2-hour drive back was quiet again, but this time, not awkward, not stiff, just full, like something unspoken had been shared, like a door had creaked open, even just a little. The next morning, Elijah arrived at the mansion 10 minutes earlier than usual. He couldn't explain why, it just felt necessary. He sat in the black SUV, watching the sun creep over the horizon, turning the sky into soft streaks of orange and violet. His thoughts drifted to Max, who had started leaving him new notes each day. Today's said, maybe this is the job that finds your heart again. Elijah smiled at the handwriting, crooked, bold, so full of belief it hurt a little. The door opened at exactly 5:45 a.m. Damien stepped in, briefcase in one hand, a tired look in his eyes. But instead of giving the usual short command, he said something different. Take me somewhere with good coffee. Not the place my assistant picked. Elijah blinked, then nodded. I know a place. They drove to a quiet corner of the city. Old cafe Elijah used to go to before his life collapsed. It was the kind of place with handwritten menus and too many chairs that didn't match. The smell of fresh cinnamon and warm bread clung to the air like comfort. Damien looked around the cafe like he'd stepped into another planet. The barista, a woman in her 60s named Louisa, greeted Elijah like an old friend. Well, look at you, Mr. Fancy Wheels, she said with a grin, handing him a steaming cup. Still, take it black. Elijah laughed, still bitter as ever. Lou, she turned to Damien. You his boss or his driver? There was a pause. Then Damien, stone-faced as ever, said, depends on the day. Elijah expected the man to be annoyed. But when they sat outside, under a creaking metal awning, Damien didn't pull out his phone. He just sat, sipped, watched the pigeons peck at crumbs on the sidewalk. Then, without looking up, he said, she was my daughter, Sophia. Elijah felt his throat tighten. She died 2 years ago. Car accident, drunk driver, 18 years old. She loved painting and hated tech. Thought it made people forget how to feel. The words came out flat, controlled, but Elijah knew the cost behind each one. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Damien nodded. She used to draw people in this cafe. I brought her here once. Thought she'd hate it, but she loved Louisa's cinnamon bread and said the chairs looked like they had stories. There was a silence, not uncomfortable, not heavy, just real. And Elijah realized something then. This man, this billionaire with private jets and glass towers, wasn't just rich. He was grieving, and grief has a way of making kings feel like beggars. That night, Elijah drove Damien back home. Meetings, no calls, just quiet. At the gate, Damien said something he never had before. You can take the weekend off, Elijah. Time with your son. But Elijah hesitated. Actually, sir, would you like to join us tomorrow? Just breakfast. No suits, no agendas. Damien looked stunned. For a second, Elijah thought he'd overstepped, but instead, Damien said, "Text me the address." That Saturday, Elijah scrambled to clean the apartment. Max was confused. "Wait, the billionaire, coming here?" "Just be yourself," Elijah told him, "and don't mention his money." Max grinned. "Then what do I call him? Maybe just Mr. Damien." When Damien arrived, wearing jeans and a simple navy sweater, Max stared at him like he'd walked out of a movie. They ate pancakes on the cracked balcony overlooking the parking lot, but for the first time in years, Elijah felt like it was enough. Damien listened to Max talk about his science fair, ask questions, even laughed once, an actual laugh, short and unpracticed, like his body wasn't used to the sound. Then, Max leaned in and said, "Mr. Damien, did you ever feel like you lost everything but didn't know how to say it?" The billionaire didn't speak right away, but when he finally did, it was soft. "Yes, every day." Max nodded. "My dad did too. But he keeps going. That's why he's my hero." Elijah froze. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up a cup. Damien noticed. When it was time to leave, Damien paused by the door. He looked around the apartment, small, imperfect, alive. "This place has something I haven't felt in years," he said. "What's that?" Elijah asked. "Peace." That Monday, everything changed. Damien gave Elijah more responsibility, not just a driver anymore. He started asking for his opinion on travel routes, scheduling, even how to handle small business interactions. He trusted him with personal documents, phone calls, and soon Elijah was accompanying him on business trips, standing silently in rooms filled with men in $1,000 suits. But the more time they spent together, the more Elijah saw the cracks beneath the empire Damien had built. Behind the boardrooms and billion-dollar deals was a man haunted by regret, guilt, and a heart that hadn't known how to heal. One night, in a high-rise suite in Chicago, Damien stood by the window, staring at the city below. "I built all of this," he said, "but I couldn't save the one thing that mattered." Elijah stepped beside him. "You can't change the past, but you can change what kind of man you are now." Damien turned to him. "What if I don't know how?" Elijah looked at him, not as a boss, not as a billionaire, but as a man. "Then let someone show you." The next morning, Damien asked Elijah to do something unusual. He handed him a file. Inside were plans for a youth center, art rooms, mentorship programs, scholarships for underprivileged kids. "I want to build it in her name," Damien said. "Sophia's place." Elijah's eyes stung. And just like that, the road that started with a desperate man looking for work had become something bigger, a path toward healing, toward purpose, toward something neither of them saw coming. But life wasn't done testing them yet, because just when things started to feel right, Elijah's past came knocking on. What he'd hidden for years threatened to destroy everything he'd built. And it all began with a letter slipped under his apartment door. "You won't believe what was inside." Asterisk. It was just a plain envelope, no stamp, no return address. But the moment Elijah saw it sitting crooked beneath his apartment door, he knew it wasn't good. His fingers trembled slightly as he picked it up. The paper was thin, cheap, like the kind used for eviction notices or court summons. Max was still, asleep in the next room, curled up in the same blanket he'd had since kindergarten. Elijah hesitated, glancing toward him, then slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, no signature. "You can run from your past, but it always catches up. Ask Damien who you were in 2015. Ask yourself what happens when he finds out." His chest tightened. The air felt heavier in the apartment. He sat down on the edge of the couch, staring at the letter, reading it again and again. The year everything fell apart. The year of the accident. Elijah had buried that part of his life so deep, he hadn't spoken of it to anyone. Not even Max knew the full truth. Not about the trial. Not about the mistake that cost him everything. He was a different man now, he thought. But the past had a way of slipping through the cracks, just when the walls started feeling strong again. By the time he picked Damien up that morning, his thoughts were storming. He gripped the wheel harder than usual. His responses were shorter. Something in his silence had changed. Damien noticed. "You okay?" he asked, eyes flicking up from his phone. "Yeah," Elijah said, too fast. "Just didn't sleep much." They drove in silence for a few minutes, city lights passing like whispers in the early morning haze. "Is it your son?" Damien asked. "No, he's good." Damien nodded. "Then it's something you're not telling me." Elijah hesitated, his gut twisted. He wanted to speak, to confess, to explain. But what if Damien looked at him differently? What if the man who had started trusting him suddenly saw him as nothing more than a mistake? "Just a rough morning," Elijah muttered. "That's all." But Damien wasn't convinced. He watched Elijah more closely that day during meetings, car rides, and lunch stops, and Elijah felt it, the tension, the pressure that night, after Max had gone to bed. Elijah sat alone on the balcony, holding the letter under the dim porch light. His phone buzzed. A text from Damien. "I don't know what you're hiding, but if it's heavy, don't carry it alone." It took him a full hour to reply. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." The next morning, Elijah arrived early. He stood by the SUV, waiting not as a driver, but as a man preparing to tell the truth. Damien stepped out of the mansion, coffee in one hand, sunglasses in the other. Elijah opened the back door, but then said, "Sir, before we go, can I talk to you?" Damien paused, then motioned toward the garden steps beside the driveway. "Let's sit." Elijah took a breath. "In 2015, I was working construction on a project funded by one of your companies. I was supervising the site when a piece of scaffolding collapsed. A young guy first week on the job fell, broke his spine. He survived, but barely. The media called it negligence. The company denied liability. I was blamed, fired, blacklisted, nearly went to jail." Damien didn't say anything. "I wasn't drunk. I wasn't distracted, but I was tired, overworked. No backup crew that day. The truth is, I made a call I thought was safe. It wasn't, and someone paid the price. I've carried it ever since." Still, silence. "I applied under a different name because no one would hire me. No one except you. And I didn't plan to lie forever. I just needed the job, needed to feed my son." Damien looked at him for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then finally, he said, "Why tell me now?" "Because you trusted me with your life, with your story, and I couldn't keep hiding mine." Damien stood slowly. The breeze moved through the trees like a soft warning. "I remember that case," he said. "I was briefed on it. My legal team handled the fallout. I never met the man in charge, never saw his face, until now." Elijah's heart pounded. "I've learned something," Damien continued. "You can build walls, empires, reputations, but trust is the only thing worth protecting." Elijah nodded slowly. "I understand if you want me gone." Damien turned to him. Double quotes. "No, you stay." Elijah blinked. "What? You didn't run from it. You faced it. That makes you the kind of man I need around me. Not perfect, but honest." Relief flooded Elijah so quickly, he had to sit down again. He looked away, eyes stinging. That evening, Elijah took Max out for ice cream. He didn't tell him everything, but he told him enough. "We all make mistakes, buddy," he said. "But owning them, that's what helps us grow." Max nodded like he already knew. The next week, Damien introduced Elijah to someone new, his head of philanthropy. He wanted Elijah to help lead the design of Sophia's place, not just as a name, but as a mission. Real decisions, real impact. "You've lived the struggle," Damien said. "You know what these kids need better than anyone in my company." Elijah couldn't believe it. The man who once barked orders now trusted him to shape something lasting. But just as the pieces were falling into place, something else came up. A woman from Elijah's past, the mother of the man who had fallen during that construction accident. She'd seen the news about Damien's new driver. She wanted to meet, not to accuse, not to reopen wounds, but for closure. And Elijah knew he had to face her. What he didn't know was that the meeting would reveal a secret about the accident that would shake everything he believed about that day, including whether it had really been his fault at all. Asterisk. She was waiting for him at a park bench beneath an old oak tree, her hands folded tightly in her lap like she was holding something in. Elijah saw her before she saw him. She looked smaller than he remembered older too. Life had carved worry into her features, but her eyes still held the same weight. The grief of a mother who had watched her son's life change in a single moment. Elijah's steps slowed as he approached. His palms were sweating. Every muscle in his body wanted to turn around, to pretend he hadn't seen the letter, hadn't agreed to meet. But he kept going, because that was what he'd promised. Himself no more running. When she looked up and saw him, there was no anger in her expression, just something quieter, worn, complicated. "Elijah," she said, like she was still trying to decide how it felt to say his name again. He nodded. "Mrs. Jennings." They sat in silence for a minute. Children played in the distance. A dog barked. A breeze moved the leaves, but neither of them moved. Finally, she spoke. "He walks now," she said, staring at the ground. "Not well, but he walks." Elijah swallowed. "I'm glad to hear that. He doesn't talk about that day anymore. Not to me, not to anyone. But I still remember every second, every phone call, every night I sat up praying he wouldn't lose the will to keep going." Elijah nodded, eyes locked on his hands. "I've thought about that day every morning for the last 9 years. She turned to him, slowly. "Then maybe it's time you heard what you didn't know." He looked up, surprised. Her expression had changed. Not angry, not bitter, but purposeful. "I found something a few months after the accident," she said. "He never knew I had it. A message from another worker on your team. A voicemail." Elijah's heart thudded. It was sent an hour before the collapse. The man said he saw one of the temporary welders remove support bolts on the east end of the frame. Said he was trying to shortcut the job so they could leave early. He warned him to fix it, but that welder never did. Elijah's mouth went dry. "I tried to get someone to listen," she continued, "but the site had already been cleared. The company settled fast. Nobody wanted to dig further. They pinned it on you because your name was on the clipboard." He was frozen. "Why didn't you come forward?" "I didn't know if it would help," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You were already gone. So was the job. So was my trust in anyone connected to that place." Tears stung the corners of Elijah's eyes. He thought about all the years he'd carried the guilt, the weight, the shame, all the moments he'd doubted his worth because of one decision, one tragedy, one wound that never healed. But now he knew the truth. He hadn't failed alone. "I needed to tell you," she said gently, "because I see your face in the papers now, with that billionaire, with that project, and I thought, maybe you deserve a chance to start again without that lie holding you down." Elijah closed his eyes. For a moment, all he could do was breathe. "Thank you," he whispered. When he opened them, she was looking at him with something close to peace. "Do something good with it," she said. "Make it count." That night, Elijah stood on his balcony, staring out over the city. He held Max's latest note in his hand. "Even broken things can be built again. Dad just takes the right hands." He smiled, letting the words sink deep. The next morning, Elijah told Damien everything about the meeting, the voicemail, the truth. Damien didn't look surprised, just thoughtful. "I wondered," he said quietly. "The reports were too clean." Elijah watched him for a moment, then asked, "Why did you hire me?" Damien looked up. "Because you walked in with nothing to prove, and everything to protect. That kind of honesty is rare, and I trusted it." He stood, walked to his window, then said something Elijah wasn't expecting. "I want you to lead Sophia's place, not just help. I mean lead it, full time, build the program, find the right people, tell the right stories." Elijah blinked. "Me? I don't even have a degree. I've never run a non-profit." "You've run something harder," Damien said. "You've kept your son's world from falling apart, even when yours was broken. You've shown me what courage looks like outside of press releases. That's what I want leading this." Elijah didn't answer at first. He just let the words soak in. A year ago, he was delivering groceries and wondering how to pay for Max's sneakers. Now, someone believed in him enough to hand him a dream he never thought he deserved. He thought about Max, about the apartment, about the days that almost broke him. He looked Damien in the eye and said, "I'll do it, but only if I can run it the right way." "Exactly why I'm asking you." Over the next few weeks, Elijah's world transformed. He traded the black SUV for early planning meetings, late-night calls with donors, and site visits to empty lots that would soon be filled with laughter, color, and hope. And through it all, Damien stood beside him not as a boss, but as something closer to a friend, a mentor, maybe even a brother. One day, Max came to the construction site with Elijah. He wore a tiny hard hat and carried a clipboard, pretending to be the project manager. The workers loved him. Damien watched from a distance, then said quietly to Elijah, "He looks like he believes in you." "He always has," Elijah replied. Damien nodded. "Maybe now you believe in yourself, too." But just when the foundation was being laid, and everything felt like it was finally right, Elijah received another letter. This time, it wasn't unsigned, and it didn't come to his door. It came to Damien's, a warning, a threat. Someone didn't want Sophia's place to open, and they were willing to destroy everything to stop it. Asterisk. The envelope was on Damien's desk when he walked into his office. No postage, no return address, just his name scrawled in harsh black ink across the front. He stared at it for a few seconds before picking it up. It felt heavier than it should have. Inside was a single photo and a typed message. The photo showed Elijah standing at the edge of the construction site for Sophia's place, clipboard in hand, smiling as he spoke to a group of kids during a tour. Behind him was Max, holding a hard hat twice his size. The joy was obvious. So was the target. The message read, "You're making too much noise with the wrong people. Shut it down, or we will." No signature, no name, just the weight of a threat. Damien didn't hesitate. He called Elijah that same night, told him to meet at the office, no questions. When Elijah arrived, he could tell something was off. Damien's expression wasn't anger, it was concern. Genuine, deep concern. He handed Elijah the photo. "Someone doesn't want Sophia's place to exist." Elijah's face went pale. "They mentioned Max," Damien added quietly. That was all it took. Every cell in Elijah's body switched into protection mode. His jaw clenched. "I'll pull him from school. Keep him with me." Damien shook his head. "No, you keep going. That's what they want to scare you into stopping. But we finish this." Elijah looked at him, surprised. Why would they care this much about a youth center? Damien hesitated, then pulled out a file. He tossed it on the table. "Because of who owned that land before we bought it." Elijah opened the file. Names, numbers, transactions, hidden partnerships, shadow companies, and at the center, an old real estate shell corporation, linked to a former business rival of Damien's, a man who built half his fortune on deals that never saw the light of day. This project shines a spotlight on things they've spent years keeping buried. They see it as a threat, not because of money, but because it forces change. Elijah leaned back, his heart pounding. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because I didn't want to pull you into a storm you weren't ready for." "I am now," Elijah said, steady. "I didn't come this far just to run." They doubled security around the site, moved meetings to secure locations. Elijah carried a burner phone for emergencies. And Max was placed in an after-school mentorship program run by one of Damien's closest allies, well guarded and off the radar. But the threats didn't stop. Anonymous texts, a brick thrown through the community center's front window, slashed tires on a staff member's car, all meant to create fear. But none of it stopped the work. If anything, it made them dig in deeper. Meanwhile, something inside Elijah shifted. He found himself stepping into rooms he used to avoid, facing men in polished suits and sharp tongues who looked at him like a misfit, but listened when he spoke. Because Elijah wasn't selling a product. He was building a promise, a place for kids like Max, for fathers like him, for families left behind by systems built to forget them. The groundbreaking ceremony was set for spring. Every day closer felt like a small act of rebellion, of hope. But 3 nights before the ceremony, someone cut the power to the site. When Elijah arrived that morning, he found graffiti sprayed across the walls of the portable trailers. "He doesn't belong here." He knew exactly who he was. Elijah didn't say a word. He picked up a roller brush, painted over every letter, then went straight to Damien's office. "Let them come," he said. "We're still opening." Damien smiled just slightly. "I never doubted that." That afternoon, they held a private press meeting. Damien, usually calculated and distant, stood beside Elijah as he spoke from the heart. No speeches, no teleprompters, just truth. "I was once a man no one would hire," Elijah told the crowd. "A man who thought a mistake had written the last chapter of his life. But someone gave me a second chance. And now, I want to give that to every kid who thinks their story ends before it begins." The crowd went silent. Then applause. Real, thunderous applause. That evening, Elijah walked into his apartment and found Max asleep on the couch, a book open on his chest. Next to him was another note, crumpled slightly from his hand. "You didn't quit, so I won't either." The night before the opening, Damien handed Elijah a small box. Inside was a key, engraved Sophia's place, Director Elijah Hayes. "It's yours now," Damien said. "You earned every part of it." Elijah didn't have words, just tears, and a handshake that turned into an embrace. But in the shadows, someone still watched, someone not finished, and on the day of the grand opening, just as the ribbon was being cut, a black car pulled up across the street. The man who stepped out had a face Elijah hadn't seen in almost a decade. The man who once owned the company that ruined his name. The one person Elijah never thought he'd face again. And this time, he wasn't here to talk. Asterisk. He stepped out of the black car like he owned the ground beneath his feet. Wesley Crane, a name Elijah hadn't heard in years but had never really forgotten. The man who once sat at the top of the real estate firm responsible for more ruined families than buildings built. He was older now, but still had that same quiet arrogance, the kind that came from never being told no. He adjusted his cufflinks as if he were about to walk into a boardroom, not the grand opening of a community center that stood as a monument to everything he tried to destroy. Elijah saw him from across the street, flanked by two younger men in tailored suits. He froze, one hand still holding the oversized scissors used to cut the ceremonial ribbon. The crowd was clapping. Kids were laughing. Max was at the front of the line, pointing at a mural he helped paint. And just beyond all of it, stood the man who tried to bury the truth. Nearly a decade ago, Damien noticed the change in Elijah's expression before he saw what caused it. When he followed Elijah's eyes and saw Wesley, his face turned to stone. "What's he doing here?" Damien asked quietly. Elijah shook his head. "I don't know, but I think he wants me to remember who he is." Damien stepped forward, protective, ready to intercept. But Elijah stopped him. "No, let me be." He walked through the crowd like a man heading into a storm he'd already survived. When he reached Wesley, neither of them smiled. "Elijah Hayes," Wesley said, almost amused. "Didn't expect to see your name on the front of a building like this. Last I heard, you were working delivery routes." "People change," Elijah said calmly. "Some of us grow. Some just hide behind lawyers and threats." Wesley's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Be careful with your tone. This land has history." "Yes," Elijah said, "and this building is how we rewrite it." Wesley stepped closer. "You think a couple of kids in a mural change anything? You're standing on ground that was meant to be profitable. Now it's a charity circus." Elijah didn't flinch. "It's not about profit. It's about purpose." Wesley's face tightened. "I could have crushed this project 10 different ways, but you didn't," Elijah said. "And you know why? Because, for the first time in your life, you saw what happens when people don't back down." There was a pause. Then Wesley reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "Enjoy your little spotlight, Hayes," he said, handing it over. "But don't forget, heroes fall the hardest." Elijah took the envelope, but didn't look at it. "Not yet." Wesley turned and walked back to his car. No scenes, no shouting, just poison masked in calm. When Elijah returned to the crowd, Damien pulled him aside. "What was that?" "A reminder of who I used to be," Elijah said, "and why I'll never be that man again." Later that evening, when the crowd had gone home and Max was asleep on a beanbag chair in one of the reading rooms, Elijah sat alone in his new office. The building smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. He opened the envelope. Inside were legal documents, thinly veiled threats, a quiet warning that Crane Industries still held a tiny piece of the land and oversight in a contract from years ago, one that gave them leverage if they wanted it. He stared at the papers for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Damien. "You saw it?" Damien asked. "Yeah, we'll fight it," Damien said, legally, carefully. "They won't win." Elijah was quiet for a moment. "They already lost. The doors are open. The kids are laughing. We exist. That's more than they can undo." A few days later, Elijah stood in the back of the art room and watched Max lead a group of younger kids through a drawing exercise. The walls were covered in paintings, some messy, some beautiful, all full of life. One in particular caught Elijah's eye. A child had drawn a man standing in front of a building, holding hands with a boy. Over the top, they'd written, "My hero wears work boots and shows up even when it's hard." Elijah stared at it for a long time, then turned away before the tears could spill. That weekend, Damien visited without security. He brought fresh-baked muffins from a local bakery and sat on a beanbag next to Max, asking him about school. They laughed like old friends. Elijah watched them from the doorway. In that moment, it struck him how far they'd all come. From silence in the back seat of an SUV to this warmth, connection, family. When the staff asked Elijah if he would speak at the first parent-student event, he hesitated. "I'm not great at speeches," he said. One of the volunteers smiled. "You don't need a speech, just speak your truth." And so, he did. Standing in front of a room full of families, some broken, some healing, all searching for something, he told them the story of a man who once thought his life was over, who wore shame like a second skin, who thought all he could offer his son was survival. And then, one job changed everything. Not because of money, not because of luck, but because of people who saw past what he was, and into who he could be. "Not a billionaire," he said. "I'm not a genius. I'm just someone who decided not to let my worst day define me. And if you're sitting here wondering if you're good enough, strong enough, worthy enough to start again, let me be your proof." The crowd rose to their feet, not out of politeness, but because every word had hit something inside them. Later that night, Max sat beside him on the steps of Sophia's place, their feet dangling just above the ground. "You'd think it'll last?" Max asked. Elijah looked up at the stars. "I think it already has." In the quiet that followed, he finally felt it, peace he had been chasing for years, and the road that began with a job no one wanted had led him here to purpose, to healing, to home.